Okay, this is also coming a day late. I apologize for those of you that would care. But I had, of course, the past few days I had a religious holiday, Rosh Hashanah, which actually falls pretty frequently around the time of 9/11. Now, I've been watching a range of reactions to what is the 17th anniversary of 9/11. And to tell you the truth, I think emotionally I've kind of become withdrawn from it. And the fact of the matter is, and I don't know why, I just picked a photo of George Bush as he really is. That's not like people want to nowadays either romanticize what happened that day in order to continue this whole thing about how, oh, we fought in a noble war on terror and everything, or they want to basically blame the entire thing on the United States, claiming that it's either one of two things: either we deserved what happened on 9/11, or it didn't happen in any way the way that was portrayed on the media, or 9/11 was the beginning of the new America, the America that fights terror. I don't think I can agree with either of those anymore. Of course, there's people like Sticks who happen to think that, they're basically forming their opinion around the fact that we intervened in Iraq and that it created the Patriot Act, etc. And then you talk about people like Cynthia McKinney that don't even believe that the towers came down unless it was through a controlled explosion. All of those people, I think that they have their point to make. I'm not really as in depth about it as other people. There's Lionel, of course, who can't go a day without talking about 9/11. So I think you guys can forgive me for talking about it a little bit today, but not in the same way as they do. This is my approach to it. All those theories about what really happened on 9/11, people can continue to prognosticate and, say whoever it was, whether it was really Israel, whether it was really, some of the right wingers want to say that it's Iran or something. And I think that kind of misses the point. The fact of the matter is that if 9/11 happened, the very fact that it did happen, that did happen is testament to how incompetent of a leadership we've had for the past several decades. You see, all of it was permitted by this massive military-industrial complex, which I guess I'm using a really cliche term now, but our military and also our intelligence services for decades advertised themselves to be the best in the world. Now, I know that during the 90s it was a little more low-key because under President Clinton, obviously, they didn't really emphasize the role of the military. Bosnia and Kosovo were really kind of more subdued war efforts. And I think that in retrospect, they didn't accomplish much, Bosnia or Kosovo. And it's very debatable whether we should have really intervened there, given how disastrous other conflicts have. Look, I think that the U.S., obviously, there are countries that say, well, we need them in order to keep us, A, stable, B, out of some sort of genocide, C, out of the hands of an enemy conqueror. I get it that there's other countries that think we should have that role. I think that 9/11 essentially proves that this really has been taken to its logical conclusion, and we have to pull back all the way. Well, maybe not all the way, but we really have to roll back on the interventionism. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You see, the reaction to 9/11 by President Bush, of course, was at first to invade Afghanistan and bomb, also to bomb Afghanistan and then invade it. And there was a belief at the time that through this, They would eliminate this global terror network known as Al-Qaeda. Of course, the Taliban was covering for them. And that would be the solution. But I think people know now. People know now. A lot of people know now. I mean, I guess there's some people that will never learn, but people are aware today more than ever that that was kind of an illusion. People thought at the time, because really most Americans and most Westerners don't really study at all the differences between any of these countries in the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa. They don't really understand that the spread of radical Islam is sort of independent from just one network of people who promote the ideology. There are a number of very, very sophisticated networks of people that spread it. Of course, how are we supposed to control the spread of radical Islam from Iran? It's not the same network as Al-Qaeda. They tried for a while to make it seem like that, but there are some connections. They're not strong enough to justify a war in Iran back in 2001. So President Bush, I think, correctly in that case, one of the few decisions he made that was kind of justifiable. He did not decide to invade Iran, even though he decided to invade Iraq, which was a horrible decision. And I even got some pushback last week from somebody who happened to be a leftist, happened to be, pretty far left, saying, well, it should be apparent that it's better for Iraq to live the way it is now, as opposed to under the tyranny of Saddam Hussein. That's not the issue here. The issue is, are we supposed to be going and invading other countries just because they have horrible dictators, etc., or are we supposed to be addressing threats to our country? And at that moment, in 2003, which was 2 years later, there was little to no connection between what had happened in 9/11 and what happened with Saddam. And I think many of us had the wool pulled over our eyes. What I think should have happened following 9/11, and, of course, this isn't a solution that I thought of at the time because I was in 10th grade, so you can forgive me if I wasn't exactly, Cecil Rhodes with like the big geopolitical ideas. But what the U.S. should have done is this. They should have threatened Saudi Arabia, said, we're not going to give you any military aid. We're going to pull our troops out of out of the region. We're going to pull our troops out of the Gulf, and you'll have to fend for yourselves. We don't give a shit if you don't hand over or dispense with the people that are affiliated with this group, and basically root them out and purge them, and deal with the problem yourselves, and stop asking us to be your fig leaf against Saddam. Then fuck you. And that would have been fine, and we wouldn't have had to deal with Iraq at the time, because Iraq was not really that close to Al-Qaeda at all. There were a couple incidental allegations of Al-Qaeda contact with Iraq. Of course, there's other problems with Iraq. I don't think that any of them justified going to war there. Of course, at the time, I couldn't vote anyway. I think by the time I could vote, the war in Iraq was already like a year old. So anybody who's saying, "Oh, well, you should," I didn't even vote in that election, by the way. That's another thing that people assume, that you were through that because you oppose leftism now, you supported warmongering back in the 2000s. The first time I voted was in 2012. So by that time, Obama was 4 years into his term in office, and I thought that he was a disaster. And to be honest with you, I think I'll admit this. Other people don't admit when they make a mistake. I'll admit that it was a mistake for me to vote at all in that election. Mitt Romney was a complete waste of any confidence. And for me to vote for him, I think I kind of, and he lost the election, and I still regret voting for him. I think it was a tremendous, tremendous failure as a human being. Mitt Romney, just this pathetic shell who goes up there and says, we got to just be a little better and then streamline the government and make it waste money in less obvious ways. That was Mitt Romney. So that's the first person I voted for. So anybody who wants to say, well, where were you back in the 2000s with Bush and McCain and whatever? I'll tell you where I was. I wasn't in a voting booth. So what should have happened back in the 2000s, and yes, this is backseat driver mode. But what do you want? I wasn't even of voting age at the time. What Bush and his, what the president should have done. I can't bring myself to think that Bush would have ever done something competent, because the man was just a joke. Not that I would have supported Gore either. But what he could have said was this: look, you are going to deal with the problem internally, Saudi Arabia, or fuck you. We're not going to sell you any military hardware ever again. If you attempt to, also, yes, they should have addressed some of the military threats around the world concerning Al Qaeda, but Saudi Arabia never became, during that period, a real asset to the war on terror. If the war on terror can even be taken seriously as a concept, okay, that's also debatable. What he should have done was he should have called these people who were the heads of these Arab governments, Arab and Muslim governments. For example, the president of Egypt, he should have said, look, we know several of your citizens were involved in these hijackings. If you want to continue to have a relationship with us, you know what to do with the people that, and this is not a humanitarian stream, by the way, but let's look at it this way. If Egypt would have executed a lot of these people at the time, then of course this awakening in the 2010s, this Arab Spring that did bring the power of fundamentalist Muslim leadership, probably would have been much weaker, and maybe a true civil uprising would have happened. That Egypt would have been a little more democratic today, but it didn't. That's the simple truth. What would have happened if Egypt would have dispensed with those people is that people on the left would have probably made a major stink for about 2 weeks and then would have forgotten about it, because they actually if you look at their actions today, people on the left have this funny relationship with human rights. It's pretty amazing. Okay, if it's a government like Indonesia that during the Cold War they were executing a lot of people for affiliations with communism, they can't stand it. They think it's some sort of major international injustice. Well, we'll look at Indonesia now, 50 years later. Indonesia, not the most prosperous nation in Asia, but it's also not the poorest nation in Asia, and it's doing relatively well compared to other countries around the world in similar circumstances. It's actually Indonesia. I'm just selecting it for argument's sake. Could be in the future a pretty big regional power, and it's never been kind of the weak, tottering, this place on the verge of economic collapse, the way that actual principled communist regimes have been. And that's all thanks to what happened in the 60s with Suharto. Now, does that justify everything that they've done? Absolutely not. But you look at other similar regimes in Southeast Asia during the time, the ones that became communist, such as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Those regimes also committed genocide, and they did create massive human misery on unprecedented scales. Okay? So what happens with the left when they get a regime that they're sympathetic to, such as the Assad regime today, that they do commit major human rights abuses, that they do end up bombing civilian centers of population. You see that in all sorts of places. You see that in Iran, by the way. Iran, the left supports Iran today. Now, I don't know how many times I have to say this, because people are still going to twist my words. I do not support intervention in Iran unless they attack first. Okay, and therefore, I think I set a pretty high bar for what I think would need to happen in order for that for that to occur. But let's keep going here. Leftists tend to love Iran. You know, they watch their media, press TV or whatever, the George Galloway, and then I think that Jason Unruh is on it too. These leftist people, they love Iran. This is a country that when the Iranian Revolution came to power in 1979, they did hang communists from cranes. They did do Iran was about as, and it was just as anti-communist as it was anti-American in 1979. One of the reasons that the Iranian Revolution occurred was because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. It wasn't only because of American meddling in Iranian affairs and the Shah. That was of course probably above the Soviet intervention. But yes, the Ayatollahs, the Iranian hardcore theocratic leadership, came to power partly as a result of a different movement on the left. Those of you that don't remember, in 1979, when the Shah finally fell, it was debatable what type of government would emerge from there. Some people thought kind of a Western-style democracy would develop from there. Iran is actually a very sophisticated society with a big intellectual and academic class. But in the end, thanks to popular acclaim, the Ayatollahs did rise to power, and they've never really become anything other than this kind of Puritan regime that saddles itself over a society that frankly I think it's if you look at Iran as a whole, most Iranians I think don't really believe in the ideology of the Ayatollahs. There are a lot of religious people, of course, but I don't think that people really believe in this. I think they call it the Vilayat al-Faqih or Vilayat. I don't remember how to say. I don't speak any Persian, by the way. I speak a little Arabic. But that type of state, which kind of is, it's an interaction between kind of a constitutional monarchy, so to speak, and the theocratic state. There's the supreme leader. That was kind of a type of government that Iran imposed as a reaction to Western democracy and Soviet communism. Okay, now today, despite the fact that that's never reformed, despite the fact that there's virtually no movement towards the type of government that the left wants, they're in love with Iran. They think Iran is a fantastic country. They think Iran is the answer to all the problems that are happening in the region. Why? Because they also support the Syrian government. They also support Russian intervention in the Middle East. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that I support U.S. intervention. I've opposed intervention of all of these countries in the Middle East. The U.S., Israel, Russia, Turkey, Iran. I think that they're all harmful towards Syria and Yemen, by the way. If you think that one type of intervention is wrong, maybe you should be consistent, oppose the other type. I think that it's plainly necessary. But people on the left don't seem to think that way. They don't seem to think, that they'll whine constantly about certain occupations, the occupation going on in the West Bank. They'll whine constantly about the regime over in Egypt, for example. They'll complain about what's happening in certain countries, like especially in Europe with the migrants and whatever. They'll say, "Oh, this is all earned by our interventions in the region." No. Well, think about it. Iran is intervening in the region as well. Iran is intervening in Iraq as well. Iran has a fight against a separatist Kurdish movement within its own borders. Iran has a war against Baloch separatists on the eastern frontier, more towards the border with Pakistan. So people really are not consistent about it. You can still oppose what George Bush did in the early 2000s with 9/11, and then of course I wouldn't say I oppose every single thing that Bush did, but of course the Patriot Act didn't solve anything. So, but of course you know the war in Iraq. You can oppose the war in Iraq, and you can also oppose Iranian intervention in other countries in the Middle East. Those people that think that because Iran happens to be situated, you know, I think what is it? It's on the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. That they have some sort of they also have a right that's greater than the United States to intervene among its neighbors. Then by the same token, think about that. Think about this. By your standards, we have the right to invade the Bahamas because it's in our own purview. Obviously, the U.S. is not invading the Bahamas. Obviously, the U.S. is not. We're not going to invade Cuba in the near future. Of course, there were attempts in the past, and there were interventions in Cuba. But by your standards, because Iran happens to be situated over there, they have the entitlement to intervene in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in other countries in the region. Okay, then you don't have any consistency. If you can't condemn intervention by one side and then be consistent and say the same thing about the other side, it really doesn't matter. That's about it. I think I went a little too long with this one, but I guess it's fine because it's a topic that's, of course, at the foremost of people's minds at the moment with 9/11 and the anniversary. I hope to be back tomorrow. Of course, there's another video that's going to be up about the new live stream tonight at 11:30. So please stay tuned for that, and I'll talk to you later. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and comment when it uploads, and subscribe to the new channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. See you later.